Good afternoon or good morning here, first year experienced students. I'm Sylvia Munoz-Schmott. I'm a professor at Oxnard College, and I've been working with the first year experience team to bring about some financial literacy workshops. We began with these last October, and with me I have Alfredo Martinez from CBC Federal Credit Union. He's been at all these workshops, and today we're actually talking about retirement. You know, we did a survey with several of the students from first year experience and found that there were some really interesting topics that all of you wanted a little bit more information about. So the reason why we're bringing to you retirement is that we wanted to showcase some valuable things that you could take a look at here this April before we end for the summer break, but also too knowing that you can plan ahead. You know, we just talked about loans, we talked about credit scores, we talked about banking, and so now we have this valuable topic about retirement. Before I turn it over to Alfredo, I want to let you know who he is. So he was born and raised in Ventura County, and he's the Community and Special Events Coordinator at CBC. He not only plans all their events, but manages partnerships with the community. And I know he's working really hard right now on a special project for all the members of CBC Federal Credit Union with regards to this COVID-19 pandemic that we're dealing with. But he has, in his short tenure at CBC, he's introduced new initiatives such as workshops and Helping Hands program, and then their EPIC Partners program. He has a Bachelor of Science in Business with an emphasis in marketing from Cal State University, Channel Islands, and he went to the Martin D. Smith Business and Economics School. So with that, I will turn it over to Alfredo. Thanks.
Thank you, Professor Snop, for that lovely introduction. Hi, guys. As Professor Snop said, my name is Alfredo Martinez, and I'm here to deliver a little bit of information about retirement to you guys, and more specifically in the terms of employee-sponsored accounts. Before we get started, I want you to take a few minutes, hit pause, and take the pre-survey that we have outlined for you. Professor Snop did a great job with these, so if you can take a moment, hit pause, and fill that out. Great, I'm guessing you're back. Fantastic. So what we have today is retirement, specifically employee-sponsored accounts. What that really means is when you go out into the workforce, you're going to have options. You're going to be sitting in an interview, and they're going to be asking you, do you have questions? And this is one of these pertinent questions that you can ask when you find yourself in that position. Hey, do you offer retirement accounts? If so, you know, what benefits do they come with? And so with further ado, let's jump right into it. I have outlined some workshop goals that I hope that you leave with today, and I have 3 of them. So the first one says, learn about employee-sponsored accounts and its differences. We're going to be covering in depth what those are today. We also want to understand the importance of participating today versus tomorrow. So we're going to look at, you know, a couple options, what it means to start today, saving today for your retirement, as opposed to maybe at a later date. And we're also going to look at the value of money and how that changes over periods of time. I hope that after today, you leave with some really good information on why this is so important. And if you're tuning in right now, definitely pay attention, because you can actually retire with a very healthy retirement account and find yourself in the best situation possible. It's important when you talk about retirement, to talk about Social Security. The reality of Social Security is that now more days, most folks are finding themselves working to kind of supplement their income, and Social Security should be seen nothing much more than that, a supplemental income. I have outlined on the left side here is really just 4 charts that talk about the increasing cost of living. You have Medicare top left, right next to it prescription drugs, right below it heating oil, left to that real estate tax. As you can tell from a time frame of less about 17 years, how the increased costs are going up. So essentially, the cost of living is going up, and that you got to ask yourself, what kind of retirement do I plan to have when I hit this age of retirement? A little bit more stats on that. The average Social Security benefit is about $16,440. Although that may sound like a large sum of money, $16,000 really isn't a lot in a span of 12 months, a year per se. The maximum Social Security benefit that you can sometimes see is about $32,000, which is a lot more than the 16,000, but still not enough to really live the life that you would like. So really, as you go through this workshop, I ask you, think about what type of life you want to live when you hit 65 or when you plan to retire. Do you want to, be able to travel and kind of have a little bit of time to do all these other things? Another interesting stat that I have here for you is in 2000, 4 million senior citizens were working. Today, 9 million are. Why is that the case? Why are more senior citizens working today than they were in the past? Although I don't have too much data on that, one can kind of lead to assume that, part of it comes from retirement planning. Did they maybe have the education or the resources at a young age to start their retirement plan? Or did they have hardships in their lives that kind of made them pull from the retirement a little bit earlier than they anticipated? The moral of the story here is that you don't want to find yourself in a situation where you have to work once you hit that age to supplement your income. The idea is that if you start now, that you may be able to avoid yourself, from being in that position. And we're going to talk about that today. I know that retirement is one of these things that sometimes gets left behind. We don't really, as young folks, we don't really understand the importance, and we're like, we'll worry about that next time. As a young person myself, I would say to those folks is definitely pay attention, because you could be leaving serious money on the table. And with that, let's talk about retirement. So when can you retire? Everybody says, well, you're going to retire at some age. A lot of us folks don't know what that means. So full retirement age is the age at which a person may first become entitled to full or unreduced retirement benefits. No matter what your full retirement age, you may start receiving benefits as early as 62 or as late as age 70. So at some point, you're going to have to make a decision when you hit 62. Do I want to retire now? Do I want to retire a little bit later? Well, there's pros and cons to that. Without going too much into specific, really what it comes down to is that your benefit packages can either be reduced if you start sooner, or they can be increased if you start later. So if you work till the age of 70, you can get the potential maximum benefit that you can receive. So that's pros and cons. That's something that you will have to decide when you hit that stage of life. Do I want to work a little bit longer, a few more years, and get my full benefit package? Maybe you can, maybe you shouldn't. Really, it comes down to how well you planned. If you have a financial advisor at that stage of your life, your financial advisor will be able to tell you, look at Bobby, you can retire at 63 because you planned so far ahead, and this is how much money you can expect to see on a monthly basis. Some folks aren't in that position, so they have to work up to the maximum age of 70 so they can get the maximum payout. And they do that because they know that maybe they don't have as many funds saved as they anticipated they would, and so they need to supplement their security for the remaining part of their life. It's kind of interesting to think about from a young person's perspective, is that I will one day be that old. I will one day have to make these decisions. Really what it comes down to is education. If you familiarize yourself with these decisions early on, you can kind of navigate your life and make these decisions accordingly. So when you get to that point, you find yourself in the best possible situation. So what does that look like when you finally start working and you're in that office and your HR person is talking to you in that interview, and you ask them, hey, what benefits do you guys offer? Well, really, it comes down to what sector you're working. We have the private sector, we have the public sector, and then the nonprofit sector. The most common retirement account that you probably have heard or will hear is the 401k. The 401k and the 403b and the 457 are nothing more than IRS tax codes. These numbers don't mean anything aside to what they're tied to from the Internal Revenue Service. So this allows the IRS to understand what kind of retirement plan you have, so they know what tax implications they go. I'm going to touch base briefly on all three of these, but as you can see, the 401k is the most common retirement tool used. You typically find that in the private sector, in corporations, if you're a sole proprietor, an LLC, that's what you commonly see. 403Bs, if you're interested in becoming a professor, a teacher in public education, or even in some nonprofits, that's what you're going to see. You're going to be offered 403Bs. You may be thinking, why is there a difference? Well, it really comes down to tax implications. And so with that, there's different tax implications for a nonprofit than there would be for a corporation. They're a little bit more lenient, and we'll talk about some of those differences. And lastly, we have the 457, which is really for government employers or authorized individuals. This is the most smallest group of folks have 457 compared to 401ks and 403bs. And really what it is once again, it just really comes down to tax implications. How does the IRS look at these retirement accounts? And like I said, we'll be chatting a little bit about the differences. Now that you kind of became a little bit familiar with a couple options that you may see out there once you enter the workforce, the next question that I feel like must be answered is, why should I participate? Why does it matter? Well, there's benefits. There's benefits to these employer-sponsored plans. And then really what it comes down to is that they offer tax-deferred investments very similar to IRAs with a few added benefits. What does that mean? What does tax-deferred mean? That means that from every paycheck, you can allot a certain amount to go into your 401k or 403b or 457, and Uncle Sam will take any taxes off of that. So if I contribute $60 every pay period, those $60 are going into that account. It's not 45. Uncle Sam didn't take his penny out of it. And so that really means that it allows you to put your full dollars into that account without getting any tax. Most employers will offer a company match. In many plans, they will agree to match the funds you contribute up to a certain amount. For instance, a typical match is 50 cents on the dollar up to 6% of your salary. When you think about it, this match is virtually free money. You should always contribute to your 401k to capture the match. I'm going to insert a little anecdotal story here. So my current employer, they offer a 4% match. So what that means is if I pay up to 4% out of my pay period, they'll match me 4%, equaling a total of 8%. That means that's free money. If I didn't participate, then I'm leaving 4% of what I could be earning on the table completely free. So if you're a young person right now working at a part-time or full-time and they offer some type of 401k, find out if they match. If they do match, at least try to match to that point, because you're essentially doubling your money with half of it. It's very important to really understand this at a really young age, because if you miss these offers or miss these opportunities, you're losing out on free money, which will ultimately be seen at the end of your retirement, and you could have a lot larger pool of money. This is also a great way to vet, employers as you're looking for jobs. If you're out there, you're a recent grad, or you will be a recent grad, and you're looking for work, this is an important aspect to look at. Hey, does this employer offer a retirement account? If so, do they offer a match? What is that match? These are all questions you can take with yourself to that employer when you're interviewing, or to the HR department, and they'll be happy to assist. The moral of the story with the company of the match is that you do not want to leave any free money on the table. Collect as much as you can, so when you're down in that stage of your life, things are looking good. Another neat benefit is contributions will be deducted automatically from your paycheck, which makes it a lot easier to save. I know if I had to manually pull, those funds and deposit it somewhere else, maybe I won't do it as frequently. Maybe I wouldn't be as on top of it. So there is that level of automatic discipline, which is a nice benefit. Most employers allow you to change your amounts, your percentage whenever you'd like. And for example, I could literally go on to my portal and switch my amounts or stop it whenever you'd like. But the nice thing is that if it's coming out automatically, you kind of don't see it and you don't feel it as much. However, there is something to be said about 401ks and participating. Some folks I have seen can't participate because of their immediate financial situation. So I have came across individuals who would like to participate, but they need every penny, every dollar of that paycheck to essentially operate and fulfill their obligations, whether it's bills, debts, or even just buying food on the table. So this is a conversation that you have internally with yourself. Can I participate? If so, how much can I afford to participate? If it's the full amount, great. If it's not, then maybe have a plan. Maybe in a year I can participate at this level. As your pay increases, as your career grows, that's the idea. Is that as your salary increases, you can participate more. Ultimately, having a larger sum of money at the end of your career. And lastly, I kind of touched base on this already, but it's a tax deferral on your salary. So contributions are pre-tax. So none of the income, the income that you're putting in this plan is essentially pre-tax, and it usually can then what we call the snowball effect will then multiply over time. And really, that's one of the biggest benefits is that Uncle Sam will say, hey, I realize you're trying to protect yourself and have a nice retirement. By all means, do that. We're not gonna tax these contributions for you. And so what does that look like? And how does that look like for a 401k? What are the nuts and bolts to these plans? We're going to talk about that. But the takeaway here is that these employer-sponsored plans are a great way to kind of develop resources and build on them. So when you reach that retirement age, life isn't as complicated. It's easier to live, and you're at that stage of life where you can live comfortably. 401k plan, the nuts and bolts. So a 401k plan allows employees to put aside a portion of their income for retirement. This money, often supplemented with matching funds from employers, we talked about that, grows tax deferred until it's withdrawn. The earliest age to withdraw without a penalty is 59 and a half. The nice thing about 401ks, 403bs, and 457s is that they're very similar in the way they operate. They essentially have the same definition. There are some differences between a 403b and a 401k. Specifically, 403bs have restrictions on investments. So what that means is that a 401k, you can kind of invest a little bit more freely. A 403b, coming from the nonprofit sector, they have restrictions on that. I won't go too much into the details, but I at least want you to understand a little bit of the mechanics of these plans. One of the differences is once you reach the age of 70 and a half, you'll be required to make deductions at a designated amount. So 403bs don't give you that option to roll it over or allow it to roll over to a beneficiary. At 70 and a half, you must make deductions. And usually your financial advisor or your bank or wherever this account may be will initiate that on their behalf because they have to comply legally. Once again, not a whole much difference between how they actually work, a 401k and a 403b. It really comes down to minor details of tax implications. And that's very similar to 457s. You know, it's very similar, same definition, gross tax deferred, usually has matching funds, and earliest age to withdraw without penalty is 59 and a half. One of the biggest differences, or the key difference, is that unlike with 401ks, it has no 10% penalty for withdrawal before the age of 55. So I didn't mention that about 401ks, but if you pull before your retirement age, there's usually a federal tax, which is a 10%, and then there's also a state tax. In the state of California, it's 1%. So that means if you need to pull funds before your retirement, you will be seeing some penalties, some penalties, and federally it's 10%. The 457 doesn't do that because you're a federal employee, so they give you that cut. The 457, like I said, are really for authorized individuals, and the bigger group is government employees. So if you're a young student that's trying to go into the government sector, you may come across a 457 plan. I think that no 10% penalty for early withdrawal is a very nice benefit added to that. That essentially means that if you need to pull against it or borrow against it, there's not going to be any penalties, which is nice. More money for you, right? That said, how does it work? How do 401ks develop the income that I will be needed to have the retirement account, or 457s or 403bs? It really starts with your deferral. Your deferral is another way of saying, you know, how much you're allocating, your contribution amount per pay period. In most cases, it's anywhere from $50 to $100. So every pay period, some folks are putting away 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, up to 100. And then what that means is the company, if it offers a company match, you double your money instantly there. So the company will then instantly grow your deferral to twice the amount. Since it's tax deferred, you don't have to pay Uncle Sam to put this in there. You have those tax savings, as opposed to putting, you know, let's say if you put $60 a pay period, and if Uncle Sam pulled its funds, maybe that would have been 45. So 45, there's about a $15 savings there, and that amplifies essentially your deferral. Ultimately, over a long period of time, you have more earnings, and we kind of call this the snowball effect. And so the key point here is that no matter where you start, the younger you start, and even if the deferral amount isn't that great, the idea is that over a 40-year span period, it actually will mean a lot more to you. So how does that look like? That sounds great, right? But how does that actually look like and translate to real life? Well, I actually have somebody, Chris, here. So Chris is a fictional character loosely based off real life scenarios. And Chris is an individual who kind of started a little bit late. Although his years of savings say 25, which can be, it's still a very long amount of time for saving, but it's not as much as it could be, which is 40 years, and we'll actually see an example of that. His monthly contribution was $150 for 25 years with an annual rate of return at 8%. This process is a little bit more complicated, but this graph is really just to show you what that amount can kind of lead up to. And so if you look at the graph to the right, you see his amount invested over that period of time is roughly about $45,000. Over the 25 years at an annual rate of 8%, he invested and got back $142,700. Initially, that might sound like quite a lot of money, but ask yourself, in the scheme of things, my retirement for the last 20 potential years of your life, is $142,000 enough to survive that? And although it sounds quite a lot, let's look at Jane, who's our next example, who started a lot younger. We'll use the same monthly contribution. We'll use the same annual rate of return. So let's look at Jane. So Jane was saving 40 years. Her monthly contribution was about same amount, 150, with an annual rate of return of 8%. Because she saved for about 20 more years, her total amount invested is $72,000. That's actually how much money she invested in it. Company match potentially, tax savings, and then earnings. In the 40 years, her $72,000 turned into about $500,000. $500,000 is quite a lot more than the $142,000 that Chris had. And really the difference there is 15 years. So what does that mean? That means the sooner you start, the more the time the money can compound and ultimately give you a better yield. So as once again, Chris invested $45,000, whereas Jane invested $72,000, which is not too much more over the span of 20 more years, and her retirement account is significantly a lot more. So what does this mean to you? And the takeaway for Jane and Chris is the takeaway is that you want to be more like Jane, which means is that you want to invest early, even if it's a small amount, even if it's $20 a month. If you establish this at a young age, then you have more time of saving, which ultimately means that it can compound more. And a very important note to make is that right now, according to our financial advisor, you need roughly about 16% of annual rate of return to kind of live the life that you would like. What that means is that 8% is great, $500,000 is great, but you really want to be in the right over that, which is more in the millions, and which is absolutely possible. Which is absolutely possible for every individual. You know, it's just a matter of how early you start. All you students out there that are listening to this, you know, ask yourself, your salary will most likely increase over time. And that means that you'll be able to contribute more and more into your 401k, 403b, or 457, and you could potentially come out in your retirement as a millionaire. It seems it seems almost unbelievable, but that's the reality that you live in, is that if you start early and as your salary increases and you continue to put a little bit more, then you can ultimately have $1 million by retirement. So the moral of the story here is be like Jane and do your best to avoid being like Chris. Not that Chris is a bad person, but that you could want to end up with more money. One thing that I have yet to talk about is really the risk all involved in this. Hey, Fredo, that sounds great, 401ks, 403bs, 457s, but I know there's an element of risk. This isn't just something that magically happens. And so I really want to take a quick second to talk about that. And so what we have here is a graph. So on one axis, we have the portfolio risk on the left side, and right under that, on the other axis, we have number of stocks portfolio. What you're going to see right above the number of stocks in portfolio is what you see as the undiversifiable market risk, otherwise known as systematic risk. That's just a fancy way of saying that no matter what you do, there will always be an element of risk involved. And that's just true. You know, if you're going to be investing out there in different options, there's just a level of risk that exists. So what can you do as an individual to limit that risk? The individual is outlined in the red line, the red curve that you see. Right next to, on the left side, you see the total stock risk, what highlights the total risk there. And essentially what it's saying is that the number of stocks in your portfolio limits the amount of risk. And what that gets to is, for example, let's say I put my $20,000 in Apple, and that's all I had it in. Let's say Apple, for whatever reason, they get they get a lawsuit, it destroys their stock. Those funds essentially can disappear since you have all your eggs in one basket. The idea is that if you expand your portfolio and put your funds, maybe in Apple, Home Depot, etc., and you diversify your portfolio, you limit the amount of risk. And that's what you see on the top portion where it says unsystematic risk eliminated by diversification. That's just a fancy way of saying, hey, if I increase the number of stocks in my portfolio or the number of investment options in my portfolio, my risk decreases. And then you can approach as closely as you can to the systematic risk and eliminate the unsystematic risk caused by a lack of diversification. So really the takeaway here is that if you're an investor or you plan to start investing, just know that there's always going to be a level of risk that you can't control. But there is also a level of risk that you can control, and that really determines on how diversified your portfolio is. And in most cases, how does this apply to 401ks, 403bs? Well, usually these retirement accounts are managed by a group. So the way that works, the employer speaks to these agencies or these kind of advisors, and they provide these options for you. Then they manage those on your behalf. You can tell them, hey, I want my more or less my 401k invested in this type of stock or in this type of bonds or etc. And then those are conversations that you have one-on-one to adjust for these kinds of levels of risk. And in most cases, they do a pretty good job of letting you understand, and they can kind of give you a really good idea of what you can expect when you hit that retirement age. But like I said, the takeaway here is that there will always be risk involved. You can do your part through education to kind of limit that risk. What we also need to understand when it comes to retirement is that you really have to take control now. And there's some elements of maybe right now that you're facing that you may not think will matter when you hit that retirement age, but every kind of purchase, every financial decision will ultimately play into your retirement. So what do we have? So what do we got to look out for? Debt. I feel like debt has a bad rep. For a good reason. It's because we often associate debt as a bad thing, and debt necessarily isn't a bad thing. It only turns bad when you can't pay it back or it's not under control. If you think about it, we often go into debt to make some big life purchases. We usually buy a car, and we usually take out a car loan to buy that car. We also buy a home. At some point you maybe want to be a homeowner. You'll probably have to get a mortgage along with a bank or a credit union to buy that home. And that's not necessarily seen as bad, right? So remember, debt is not a big deal as long as it's under control. And if you're in the position right now, which I was, going through college, as I had a credit card, wasn't as responsible as I could have been. The sooner, the better. Try to take care of that. There's options. I always recommend check your financial institution to see what options they have to help you. They usually have tools to help you kind of manage your debt, or they may have services to help you. One thing too to consider as you navigate your life and your career is what we call the lifestyle creep. The lifestyle creep really means is, for example, let's say you land a really cool job at Google, you're making a good amount of salary, and then you know what, you're like, now I'm making good money, now I can kind of buy these toys that I've always wanted. So you maybe have the latest model of car, the newest phone, etc. Essentially what that does is that it makes it a lot harder for you to kind of make these leaps in your retirement account. So what this says is it absorbs pay raises, prevents retirement. So if you continuously get promotions or your income increases, your salary increases, and you're not saving those additional, earnings, then it really kind of hinders the potential for your retirement. So the lifestyle creep, the key point there is be careful. As you make more money, as your life goes on, think about, hey, because I'm earning more money, does that mean my lifestyle needs to get better? Well, I'm sure it does, but think about what that means for your retirement. Maybe you could have, instead of having 500,000 like Jane, maybe you can have up to $1 million. And so really you're just kind of waiting a little bit. You're being patient and disciplined, and then really waiting to the end of your career to kind of really have that fun. Next thing is housing. And there's not much more. I know right now renting here in California is very tough, and so is buying. As we know that the cost of living is increasing, rent's an issue, buying houses, there's an affordable housing crisis. Whether you stay in the state or you move elsewhere, it's very important to understand the decision making behind renting, versus buying. Some cases, people buy earlier and then they decide to move, and they usually, sometimes the way that works, sometimes they're on the bad end of that deal and they may actually lose money from selling their home. And really what this is, without getting too much into specifics, you want to be very careful and thoughtful of, when you make the decision, is it better to rent, at this stage of my life, or is it better to buy? Reason being is because it could cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars depending on that decision making. And so a lot of this is brought through education, tons of resources out there. I always suggest go through your financial institution. And if they can't help you, then, they usually can lead you to the next best place to make those decisions. And this next point can't be stressed enough. A lot of our problems, a lot of our financial issues can be solved by borrowing. So if our car breaks down, we can either ask a friend or a family member, or we can even go to our bank or our credit union to ask for additional funds to help us. Or if, maybe your paycheck right now is a perfect example. The pandemic, some folks aren't working, so they're not getting their income, so they're relying on credit cards, which is a temporary solution to their issues. There aren't no temporary solutions for retirement. If you don't save, you won't have enough to retire the way you envision. And at the end of this, that's what we really get down to. The big takeaway is that you probably have this vision of what retirement looks like. Maybe very vague at this point, but you probably are thinking very similar to me, that I'll be comfortable, I'll be sitting somewhere, hopefully on a beach, enjoying my time, enjoying my retirement. Well, borrowing can't be the solution to retirement. You can't say, hey bank, hey credit union, hey family member, I don't have any money to pay my bills, to do what I would like to do, so I'd like to borrow. Sadly, most banks and lending institutions won't lend to you for that case. So if you don't save, you won't have enough to retire the way you would like. And really, these are elements that you can take control now. And so when it comes to debt, do the best you can to try to solve that. As your career goes, be very mindful of how you want to use that newfound income that you didn't have before. And then also be very thoughtful on your renting versus buying decisioning. When you want to buy that home or you want to rent, look at options, look at what people are paying, and definitely find the resources to help you. And once again, the big takeaway is that retirement can be solved by borrowing. So we talked quite a few things today, and I hope that you learned some of the goals that I had outlined for us, which is we learned about employee-sponsored accounts and its differences. We understand the importance of participating today versus tomorrow. We went over Chris and Jane and how that 72,000 versus $500,000 is a huge difference. We take a look at money and how value changes over periods of time, once again with Jane and Chris. And we also talk a little bit about risk. This presentation really encompasses the employee-sponsored accounts, which is just a really fancy way of saying is, hey, when you go out into the workforce, you will have options that employers put in front of you. And definitely be that individual that asks these questions and really understand what this process means and what these retirement account means, because it literally can be the difference between a very fruitful, retirement versus a frugal retirement. So it's important to understand this. That said, we have quite a few other workshops that we have lined up for you students, for the ones that like to tune in. The follow-up workshops we have are financial institutions. So I'll be covering the differences between banks, credit unions, and your options out there. Very interesting time right now, as a lot of financial institutions are now becoming financial institutions. So you see Apple with its new debit card, and you see a lot of these companies now kind of entering the financial industry. So got cool information there. And the one to follow up on this one is I'm going to be talking about individual investing, which covers stocks, covers individual retirement accounts. So for the folks out there that are kind of wanting to play out in the stock market, kind of invest and play, that would be a great opportunity for you to kind of learn a little bit more about the beginnings, the risk, and what options you have out there. That said, I really want to thank you guys for taking the time to tune in onto this, and I hope that you left this workshop learning a little bit more about your options as future employees of your organizations you wish to pursue. That said, I'm going to pass it over to Professor Snob, who has a little bit of information about the post survey that we have. So let me go ahead and do that. I'm going to mute myself now.
Great, thanks, Alfredo. very valuable information, I would say. Now, if somebody were to be a customer at CBC Federal Credit Union, could they look into establishing maybe a 401k?
Absolutely, Sylvia. I hit the video so we can get one point of view there. But absolutely. So here at CBC, we have both options. We have both on the individual side. If you wanted to manage your own retirement account, we have IRAs. Like I said in the next presentation, we'll go into specifics about traditional versus Roth, the options there. And then we also have retirement planning. So we also have a financial advisor here that can kind of direct you. The neat thing about our financial advisor, and different from most other places, that he's completely non-commission. So he's paid by CBC. He's a salary employee. He doesn't benefit from the decision he makes on your behalf. He's set. So he's ultimately making the best decisions on your behalf. So in short, yes, we have both options.
Very good. Thank you. And so with that, then we do have a post survey that we want everybody to fill out, and that would be for those who have attended and watched this workshop that Alfredo presented today. And each time we do have a workshop, we kind of measure, what did you come in with that workshop, and then what did you learn while you actually attended the workshop and learned maybe some new terms, learned some new concepts, and possibly made, are making decisions what your next steps are going to be. So with that, then we will sign off here. You'll catch then the other two workshops that Alfredo did mention, and that's going to be available to you between now and the end of this spring 2020 semester. I really appreciate everybody tuning in here. Alfredo, again, it's my pleasure to have you on this. We'll call it a workshop broadcast, and you provide some really valuable information. So much so that I would even think some of our students, I would challenge the students to see if they could help their parents then become a little bit more savvy with regards to retirement, making sure that they're, putting away some money for their retirement, along with then giving the students some kind of practical knowledge about how that all works out.
That's absolutely right. So, Professor Snob, I didn't mention too much about how this can impact your family, but that'd be an excellent starting point for you students, is maybe ask your family members, hey, how's your retirement account looking like? What did you do? What can you pull from them? Because they've gone through this, and you can actively use them as a learning piece. So I second that challenge. Please ask your family.
Exactly. All right. So with that, then we are signing off here for this broadcast for investments, and stay tuned for the second half of the investments that Alfredo mentioned about other types of investments, including stock purchases. And you may even get into the stock purchase plans that sometimes private companies have for their employees. So we'll put that into the mix for this next series. And thanks so much, and have a great rest of your day.